AV in your ears, that's Ambush being giving you this audio visual down the most interesting street in the world. With my boy Steve, Fascination Street, you already know. Let's get it when you whip in the Fascination Street. What do you...
Hi, this is Richard Kinky Big Dick Friedman. It's my full Christian name. And you are listening to the podcast Fascination Street.
AV in your ears, that's Ambush being giving you this audio visual down the most interesting street in the world. With my boy Steve, Fascination Street, you already know. Let's get it when you whip in the Fascination Street. What do you...
Welcome back, Streetwalkers. This episode is with Jeff Smith. Jeff Smith is a legend in the San Antonio and Austin area as the high-energy lead singer and frontman for the band Hickoids. He also runs the Corn Pound. In this episode, we talk about Jeff Smith and how he got into music, some of his inspirations, some of his musical connections, and why he started the band Hickoids. We also talk about the Corn Pound, which is a multi-use arts facility, which also houses Flagship Records, the Jett Bass Studio, High Voltage Music Program, and Texas Pop Music Archive, as well as SausTex Records, Jeff Smith's record label. We also talk about some of the musical acts that Jeff Smith has produced on his record label, SausTex, and what his involvement was with one of the earliest Richard Linklater documentaries called Woodshock. Of course, we talk about Jeff Smith's recent collaboration with Cacophony Clan Records to put out a benefit album, plus some of the other projects he has been working on, including Call Me Animal by Josephus and the George Jonestown Massacre. All of that and more, plus I get to play a fantastic song by Hickoids. You're going to love it. And this is my conversation with the leader of the Corn Pound, the front man of Hickoids, and the man behind SausTex Records, Jeff Smith.
Prepare to be fascinated. Prepare to be fascinated. Prepare to be fascinated.
Welcome to Fascination Street Podcast. Jeff Smith, how you doing today, man?
I've always been wondering about Fascination Street. It's a pleasure to be here.
Jesus.
I went too loud?
Yeah. So, first, where the hell are we? We're at the Corn Pound. Tell me about the Corn Pound.
The Corn Pound is a magical place full of fascinating people.
That is true. You give me a tour, I can vouch that it's full of fascinating people.
Yeah, it's kind of a multi-use arts facility. I say arts facility. That makes it sound like it's government funded, but it's not.
It does make it sound like that.
It's not, and it's not nonprofit either.
Okay, so all this stuff on the sign out there, you got like 9 different businesses on the sign. What are they? Can you name them all?
Well, we've got Flagship Records, which you saw, the record store. We've got the Jett Bass Studio, which you saw. The High Voltage Music Program, which is in the office next door. San Antonio nonprofit after-school rock and roll program.
Specifically rock and roll?
Yeah.
Like School of Rock thing?
Yes, but again, the instruction is provided for free.
Sure.
So,
cool.
And, made available to kids whose folks probably wouldn't have the money to pay for the School of Rock. Then Tex Pop in Exile for reasons we discussed.
And what is Tex Pop?
Tex Pop is a San Antonio and regional Texas music archive.
Nice.
And then we've got the Vintage Threads, which is currently on a hiatus.
And there should be one more thing, isn't there? Don't you have a record company?
Yes, SausTex Records.
And SausTex is not defunct. It's still going, right? It's still a thing?
That's correct, yeah. Have 4 releases just in the space of a few months here. Have a band from New Orleans called DiNOLA.
Is it D''Nola?
No, it's big D, little I, big NOLA.
Gotcha.
Their swan song album called Spies in the Night. Their bass player, Eddie Payne, he succumbed to cancer back at the end of June. But good album. It's a pretty interesting band, kind of at the intersection of kind of British hard blues, doom, and something else I'm not thinking of right off the top of my head, and punk maybe, and a punk edge to it as well. So generally everything on the label is roots with a punk edge.
Where were you born and raised? Where'd you grow up?
I was born in Tulsa, grew up in Houston and here.
San Antonio?
Yeah.
For a while, were you living in Austin, or do I have that?
I lived in Austin for 20 years.
So a while.
Yeah.
Well, why did you go to Austin? Music City?
I graduated from high school in 1982. I hadn't applied to any colleges, but I'd been dating this girl who was, I guess she was becoming a junior at UT at that time, and I decided I was going to Austin. And
So you followed a girl.
I submitted an application to UT, got in the middle of summer.
You did?
Yeah.
So you didn't apply to any other schools, and then you got there, you're like, hey, can I go here? And they were like, sure, why not?
Yeah. Well, I had an SAT score that was high enough,
Clearly.
Yeah.
That's cool. I know it was a different...
That was a lot of brain cells ago, though.
Yeah.
So.
I know it was a different time, but are you still paying off that debt?
I think, like a semester tuition fees and everything else back then in state was about $650.
Wow. Times are different.
Yeah.
That is wild. Okay, so what did you do for 20 years in Austin?
Well, I pretended to go to school for the first couple of years, chased a lot of girls.
I'm assuming that it did not work out with that young lady that you followed to Austin?
No, I discovered there was more pretty girls than one, and she's a lovely woman, and
Sure. So what did you do for 20 years?
Was playing in a band when I moved to Austin, a little porno punk band called the Bang Gang, and that kind of played out over about the first year. I was living up there, and I met a fellow named Jukebox.
His given name? That's cool.
Well, his friends gave him that name.
Oh, okay, cool.
I think it was Jukebox because he never shuts up. But anyway, so he was somebody who was involved in some black marketeering. He used to sell, psilocybin mushrooms. Anyway, so he was kind of my party buddy. He was 10, 11 years older than me, and I didn't know he could play guitar, and he kept telling me he wanted to start a band with me, and I was like, well, how does that work? I'm a singer.
What do you do?
And then he goes out and buys this little Fender Mustang, man, and he plugs it in and he plays the fuck out of it, in a really unique style, kind of a Hendrix with kind of a pedal steel informed vibe to it, and punk rock as well. We started writing songs in the fall of 1983 and played our first show in San Antonio in March of 1984, and so I was kind of off and running with that. And
So 1984, that's when the band started?
Mm-hmm.
What was the name of the band?
Hickoids.
The Hickoids?
Yeah.
Just Hickoids or the Hickoids?
Been expressed both ways, but it's
Well, so
it's
has
really
Eagles, but it's just Eagles.
well, it's just Hickoids. And,
Okay.
and so
Where did the name
and
come
interestingly, the Eagles.
from? You mean
Yeah.
Eagles?
The Eagles. It became popular to hate on them before it became popular to like on them again. I mean,
Sure.
I personally dislike them just because I know every word to their greatest hits album, and it's just because they were such an oppressive force of 1970s music when I was growing up.
Right. They got their radio time.
Yeah, they sure did.
That was back when it was pay for play, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
This was actually one of Jukebox's guitars here that he broke on stage in San Antonio here in 1985 or 1986.
I love that you kept it.
Well, I didn't actually. I was having lunch with a friend of mine about 3 or 4 years ago, and he said, "Oh, I've got something for you." And he opens it up, and I go, "It's that fucking guitar Jukebox broke on stage at the Bone Club."
Wow. How cool is that?
Yeah.
So let's talk about Hickoids.
Yeah.
Hickoids started in 1984.
Right.
You guys toured all over the place. But magically you broke up in San Francisco just like 3 years later?
We broke up a lot of times. The first iteration of the band lasted about 8 months. I think there was at least one quiet quitter in the band, maybe two. So the guys who had become what was known as the classic lineup the Hayes brothers, Richard and Arthur Hayes, and Davy Jones, who remained my partner in the band into the more recent eras. They came in kind of as a unit. They were in a band called the Ideals that were a first wave Raoul's band. Raoul's famous Austin punk club that opened during the month after the Sex Pistols played in San Antonio in 1978. So all those guys were good 10 years older than me.
Sure.
So I was like the 19-year-old band leader of the 30-year-old guys, and which I always kind of gravitated to older people in a way, but that's kind of an odd thing, you know.
Tell me about your brothers.
Well, my oldest brother, Martin, he's 13 years older than me, and he's still around. He's a career artillery army officer, and he lives here in San Antonio. And my middle brother, Barry, who was 10 years older than me, he was a musician, you know, my first rock and roll hero, you know. And
who did he play for?
The Krayolas.
Well, I'm a road runner, but you a hound dog. Well, I'm a road runner, but you a hound dog.
Band that still plays to this day and puts out new records. They have a new record out called El Grito, which I distribute.
Oh, you do it. Oh,
yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Nice.
The man who named the Corn Pound, Ed Hamill on Trial, he did that portrait of my brother Barry. Jett Bass was his stage name. So
Jett Bass. What did he play? The bass? Did he
played the bass. And he played the piano and the organ. Played guitar as well.
Okay, so what's the fascination with Korn?
Well, our debut album was titled We're in It for the Corn. That was kind of riffing on the Zappa, We're in It for the Money. We had a follow-up album, or EP to that, titled Hard Corn, which incidentally, the Eagles, it says, bring me the head of Don Henley in the Run-Out Band of the, you know, the etching in there. Of course, it kind of took on a life of its own from there. So now every birthday or Christmas, my girlfriend groans as the inevitable flood of corn-related tchotchkes and crockery. Now this piece here is something totally altogether different. I don't have it stocked right now, but this is kind of like the pig of rejection here. Like whenever some hopeful comes in and wants to sign with the record label, and I say, I'd love to help you, son. No dice, but have a chicharrone. So.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
Karen Silkwood had a purpose. She was headed to a crucial meeting that would blow the whistle on the billion-dollar nuclear corporation she worked for. Instead, she died in a concrete culvert on a dark, desolate stretch of highway just outside of Crescent, Oklahoma. To discredit her, authorities and the institution Karen sought to expose called her nothing more than an emotionally disturbed and sexually promiscuous drug abuser. But in her death, she became a martyr for feminism, environmentalism, and pro-labor movements. From the creators of Gone Cold, Texas True Crime comes Silkwood, a story that remains one of the most explosive conspiracies in 20th century America and became the inspiration for a critically acclaimed movie. Silkwood dives deep into 28-year-old whistleblower Karen Silkwood, her relentless fight for truth, and the chilling events that followed. Betrayal, danger, and a mysterious unsolved death that still haunts the nation 5 decades later. Seeking justice, Karen went up against a corporate Goliath and paid the ultimate price. With no known witnesses, what happened to Karen Silkwood on that cold November night? Was it an accident? Was she silenced for knowing too much? Or something far more sinister? In a world where profits are placed above safety, Silkwood takes you inside a gripping true tale of corporate greed, government cover-ups, and the deadly secrets inside a nuclear industry titan. Don't miss this eye-opening journey into one of the most powerful stories of our time. Find Silkwood on your favorite podcast platform and hit that subscribe button now. Some secrets are too dangerous to stay hidden.
Let's get back into it.
So you have been in the music scene in and around South Texas for 40 plus years.
Yeah.
Why? What I mean is, why still? Why didn't you go off and get a job with IBM or go join the military? Why is music so in your blood?
Well, that's a fucking good question. I know my dad wanted to know. But,
he told me to ask you.
But I just had a taste for it. I mean, I don't have any, illusions about what my place in the music business is or anything. And I don't really care. I love rock and roll.
Well, I mean, the fact that you're still able to pay all your bills with what you love to do, is there anything better than that?
Well, I guess if you would consider the Hickoids, the main hustle, there's a lot of elaborate side hustles around all of that.
Sure.
But I do love the art form of rock and roll, and it's had a tough couple of decades, really 3 decades since the rise of the rave and the DJ and all that. Now tribute bands and yada.
What do you think caused the downfall? Do you think it was technology and people's access to making easy shit?
That's not helpful, certainly. I mean, there's not the level of gatekeeping that was once there. And I always went outside the gatekeeping. Sure, we were signed with some little labels, but strictly speaking, I wasn't really privy to the system that made people rich. But really, I'd point to the time that when rock and roll really started dying is if you look at pictures of Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd in the late 60s, when people quit dancing to rock and roll and started being kind of passive observers, that's when rock and roll started to die. It became a spectator sport rather than a participation sport.
What's the last concert that you went to where you danced?
Last concert that I quit dancing when I quit drinking, which was about 22 years ago. So I guess the word, dance is used pretty liberally in regards to rock and roll concerts. But I'm just saying when people became very passive and seated audiences and looked at, oh, this guy's so amazing. Look what he does with that guitar. I could never do that, and the amount of talent required to play in a rock and roll band is not terribly extraordinary. I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't people who are more talented than others, but
it's a low bar of entry.
Correct.
I just love that Korn is the through line for so much of your life. That is hilarious. I mean, there's a poster on the wall behind me that is the Dutch tour dates from, 2016? And I mean, there's just a giant cob of Korn on it. Like Korn is your jam.
Yeah. Well.
Have you ever played the Helotus Corny-Ball?
No. Squares.
Okay, so why did you decide to start a record company? And when did you decide to start a record company?
Well, I've had a couple other labels during my life, but this is by far the longest lasting and most prolific.
And this is SausTex?
Yes.
SAUSTEX?
Right.
Where does the name come from?
It's a contraction of San Antonio, Austin, Texas, which originally conceived as kind of a regional folk rock label.
And when did you start SausTex?
2003. I was freshly sober. I was living in a hotel room in Amarillo, working construction on nightclubs. And
you were building nightclubs while you were sober?
Yeah, installing light and sound systems on multi-venues. This company, Graham Central Station, that had about 45 or 50 clubs at one point.
They had one here in San Antonio.
Yeah, I worked on that one.
Oh, did
so that was my first job. I was about 3 weeks sober.
Nice.
So we'd go into all the kind of Walmart towns, mid-sized cities, 100, 150, 200,000 population, and put in these big buildings that had 6 rooms in them and probably 35 to 50,000 square feet apiece, and wire them all for lights and sound. 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Didn't leave much time to get in any trouble. So I had plenty of money in my pocket. My buddy Stevie Tombstone came to me and said, "Hey, I got this album that's done, and I'm wondering what to do with it." And I said, "Well,
all your friends have a nickname. What's your nickname?"
Well, there's El Jefe, which
Sure.
of course means the boss in Spanish, often used derisively. My brother Barry told me that when you get to be about 12 or 13, there's going to be some jackass gym coach who's going to call you Smitty. And of course, it did happen exactly along that timeline, and never really got called that for a long time. But yeah, Smitty. Shirtless Leader, get that one. Thin White Duke of Hazzard.
Just to be fair, all of the Dukes of Hazzard were thin and white.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to SausTex. You were building clubs. You had a little bit of money in your pocket because you weren't drinking it away. And then you decided, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do the hardest thing in the music business. I'm going to start a record label.
Yeah, and I had fucking immaculately bad timing too. You know, I mean, that was kind of the beginning of the end of the CD era. When I, quit drinking and using drugs at the end of 2002, I couldn't send an email, on my own. I thought that the internet was kind of a fantasy, that there would really be the amount of commerce taking place on it. But that just kind of speaks to how intoxicated I was most of the previous couple of decades leading up to that. But, I think a lot of people my age, like, that everything good that's ever happened has already happened. There's nothing, worth the fuck coming out anymore. And I can see their point,
Yeah, what's all this newfangled music you speak of?
As in my day, and the hippie era, and, the rock and roll era, and, the jazz age. I mean, people find new ways of expressing themselves. I don't necessarily put out any modern sounding music just because I don't like it or care. It doesn't really pique my interest.
Do you only put out music you like?
Yes.
Why?
You've seen the movie Joe Dirt, haven't you?
Uh-huh.
So, Joe's Indian buddy that owns a fireworks stand, I often tell people I'm like Joe Dirt's buddy. It's like people want Roman candles and bottle rockets, but I like sparklers and snakes, So
you sell sparklers and snakes.
That's a kind of an oversimplification.
Sure, of course.
But the fact that something has very little chance of becoming popular, I don't think that's a reason why I shouldn't try and get people to listen to it.
Sure. You mentioned the Chicharrone Bowl over there. How do those people wander into your office and say, hey, will you put up my record?
Well, not that many people really wander into my office.
Sure. But how do people find you? How do you select the ones you are going to work with?
That's a good question. Well, of course, having been around 40 years, I have plenty of people through my history, who are reaching out, whatever fashion, Facebook, whatever. And, a lot of it are non-starters for a variety of reasons. But my baseline of what the return is versus investing in a young artist and trying to take it to the top, is probably most of, I'd say 90% of what I put out in previous times would be called vanity pressings, But again, that's more a result of people being kind of closer to my age, not having time to spend 4 or 6 months a year in the van. But the point I was making previously about the internet and technology and the gatekeeping being gone is, Spotify, I'm not going to argue with the quote unquote democracy of it, but Daniel Ek and his boys, small catalogs like mine, they've placed an effective value of 0 on them. So on the one hand, I don't really have the choice to not make the music available there because I'm not doing right by the artist if it's not available there. But on the other hand, for a small artist, the small amounts of income you can see come back are a lot more meaningful. Most of these artists never get to the point of achieving any economy of scale. Like, I guess that's the point.
Sure, they're not going to buy a house with.
So Beyonce, Jay-Z, whoever, they get 1 billion streams. It would be substantial, life-changing money for 1 billion streams to somebody I know. But to them, it's chump change. And they don't mind giving away the music because it's an endorsement deal. It's proof of concept for their concert tours where they're getting guaranteed, $500,000 a show or whatever. So I think a lot of the bigger artists really do a disservice to the smaller artists because they're the ones who have the power in the situation. So then you have the bedroom rappers, the guys that put out 10, 15 songs a week, 30, 40-second songs, and it's a verse, a hook, and a chorus, and that's it, and they just put out so much stuff every week. Shit. I'm not afraid to say it, but I'm hesitant to call somebody else's music shit, persons unknown. So the record labels now, unlike mine, they don't take any real chance on anybody. It's all based on analytics and data.
Yeah, now I think with a lot of projects, whether it's music or not, the higher ups decide whether or not they're going to work with you based on what kind of audience you can bring with you. Yeah, we'll work with you if you got 400,000 followers on Instagram, or if you've got a YouTube channel with 100,000 followers, then we'll talk. We can do your project. But I don't think that the bigger record labels and whatever movie studios and whatnot, they don't want to take a chance without sort of that kind of a guarantee that there's going to be some sort of an audience.
Right. Well, I guess the overarching point of this part of our conversation is that it's just a mirror of the larger economy, but any middle class that once existed in the music business has largely vanished, and anybody who fits into that middle class is hustling their ass off. They're recording, playing music, playing sessions, giving lessons, right. Playing humiliating restaurant gigs or their musical wallpaper.
Yeah, they're playing at all of the wineries out there in Fredericksburg.
Yeah. It's fine knowing how hard it is to really make any money or even a living wage playing music. I salute anybody that's got the fortitude and the ability and the emotional wherewithal to do it, because it can be a very gutting thing. But personally, there's 1,000 easier ways to make money.
Sure. My dad, his name is Steve Owens. He doesn't live in Texas anymore, but he lived in San Antonio for, 35 years.
His name sounds familiar.
That's where I'm going with this. He was in music in San Antonio for 35 years, probably from the early 80s to the early 2000s-ish. His biggest project, his most successful project was a band called Sapphire. They were hard rock. Not punk, but like hard rock, veering toward metal.
Right.
And
kind of pre-hair metal, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember the name.
They got a little bit of radio play locally and maybe regionally. It didn't really go anywhere. Just like every other band, they couldn't stop fucking fighting. Yeah. And it eventually went to shit, but not until they put out a pretty decent EP. I think it was an EP. So I'm assuming that that's why that name sounds familiar to you. And so because the name only sounds vaguely familiar, I don't need to ask if you know my dad.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying that I've never met him, but
sure. There's a lot. That was a time period you probably don't remember a lot about anyway.
Yeah, I remember more about the 70s and the past 2 decades than I remember about the 2 decades in between.
Sure, that makes sense. What do you look for when you decide on a project? Like, you did a deal with the Pinata Protest, right?
Yeah.
Pinata Protest?
Yeah, I put out their first 2 records. I just think, one, Alvaro is a great entertainer. He's got a vision, very independent-minded, and I love the music. I took them out to California on their first tour that they did. And as you're probably aware, living in the hill country, the accordion can be a very polarizing instrument.
Very.
And Alvaro, he knows the secret to entertaining young people and old people and people who don't like the accordion or accordion music. He is a one-man tent revival, I mean, he's like really... That's
well said. That's very descriptive. I like that.
I love the guy, and I just think he's really stays true. He's always been a very true to his heart person, and I find that as attractive, about Pinata Protest as a package as anything else,
So what exactly does SausTex do?
I think I know where you're going. So some situations, people come to me with a finished album. I say, great, let's press it up, get it out there. Some stuff, I might contract the studio and producer, whatever else, build it up from the ground up, promote it.
So you do promotions and you do PR. You do all the things. You just do different versions of things with different groups, different names.
Yeah, every deal is pretty much a one-off. So when I don't do more handshake kind of deals, They're written as jazz contracts, what they called them in the old days. Whereas, you're contracted to record this number of songs. You can't record them for anybody else for 5 years. If we want to make more records together, we can. If we don't wish to, you're under no further onus.
Cool.
But to anybody listening out there thinking of contacting me, I'm not signing multi-year $100,000 deals.
What?
I tell people this office, I said, this is where the little checks get written and nobody gets rich, so.
So do you also help with like merchandising, like hats and t-shirts and shit like that?
I leave that mostly to the artist. I do Hickoids merchandise, of course, but
And Flagship Records.
Yeah. That's kind of more of a point of performance sort of thing than most of these acts. I mean, they just don't have big national or touring footprints, and for me to duplicate their inventory and have it on hand is kind of cost and space prohibitive.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
Introducing Loom Stupid, where fashion meets quirkiness. Whether you're looking for statement tees that spark conversations or funky pieces that add whimsy to your outfit, Loom Stupid has got you covered. Join the fashion revolution and express your unique style with Loom Stupid. Visit our exclusive website at www.loomstupid.com and discover a world of fashion that's brilliantly bizarre and undeniably chic. New designs are being added all the time. loomstupid.com. Get your whimsy on with Loom Stupid, because being silly is the new stylish.
Let's get back into it.
I heard a story.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
Here we go.
I heard a story that famed Austin director Richard Linklater made a short film involving you and Hickoids. Is that a true statement? Tell me about your involvement with Woodshock.
Well, so I co-produced Woodshock for several years.
Woodshock was a music festival in Austin?
Dripping Springs.
Dripping Springs, okay.
Yeah. The first edition of Woodshock was held in 1981 in Waterloo Park, and that was produced by Chris Wing, who was a singer for a band called Sharon Tate's Baby.
Jesus Christ. Okay.
Yeah. Unusual man. But,
too soon!
Sharon Tate's Baby is always too soon,
Isn't that funny? It's been 60 years or 50 years, or whatever, still too soon.
Yeah. Anyway, 1983, I don't really know how it fell into my friend Mike Alvarez's hands, but Mike Alvarez still does music. He lives out in Los Angeles, but he was living in Austin at the time, and Rocky Erickson was his roommate. The first band I told you about, the Bang Gang, we played a version of Woodshock that he put on out the Hurlbutt Ranch out in Dripping Springs, pretty rugged area out there with a beautiful swimming hole out there. I forget how you describe the formation. I think it's maybe known as a geodese, basically a big sculpted thing that goes into a watering hole, without a waterfall feature. At any rate, I came on 1984 as a co-producer of the event. And these titles were very loose. I mean, we were making it up as we went along. We didn't have any money, but we had a pretty good turnout that year. The next year, we had a great turnout. Somehow or another, getting 800 or 1,000 people to go out to Dripping Springs, to go see bands that could not draw that many people on their own.
Sure.
So 1985, Mike and I produced a double LP from that. And
a live album?
Yeah. And that same year, Richard Linklater and Lee Daniel was a cinematographer on that. They came out and did kind of a little impressionistic short of that. And you can see Daniel Johnston in that, and some of the guys from Tales of Terror. And
for those listening, you can watch the whole short film. I think it's about 7.5 minutes, something like that. You can watch it on YouTube.
Yeah.
It's called Woodshock Short, 1985.
Right. So Rick began making...
You say Rick?
Yeah.
Were y'all friends?
We are friends.
You're friends with Richard Linklater? How cool is that?
Sometimes the famous guys, acknowledge the unfamous guys.
Sure.
So, but Rick's done very well. I'm happy for him. So he started on Slacker, his first feature, and I was cast in Slacker.
You were in Slacker?
Well, I was in the first cut, and so I was opposite Rick's girlfriend. I think we did 3 distinct scenes. So the setup was I was kind of her no good boyfriend, who goes and pulls her out of some creepy photographer's studio, and she's pissed off, and I'll tell her I'm going to buy her ice cream. And so exactly why she and I ended up on the cutting room floor, I think she might have been, and I don't know this for a fact, but I think she might have been 17 when we were filming it, and they broke up or whatever.
Gotcha.
So,
that movie has inspired other filmmakers, like a lot of filmmakers.
But Rick told me that after one of their screenings that Jim Jarmusch loved me in the cut he saw. So
wow, that's a big.
So that and $5 would get me a cup of coffee at Starbucks.
Shit, $7.50.
Yeah. I guess the moral there is don't make your screen debut opposite the director's girlfriend.
Yeah,
but,
don't do that. Don't do that. So, what made him decide to make this short film about Woodshock?
It was a happening. It was. I think that the punk movement had kind of been trotted out by the major record labels and was kind of isolated in the quote-unquote fashion centers, San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York. I mean, that's really the only place where it was having a whole lot of impact for the first 5 years of American punk, and this is in spite of the Ramones, have major label distribution, Blondie, Talking Heads. But America's a big country. The communication was very slow. Everything was monthly magazines. I mean, New Music Express, Melody Maker, those things were coming out once a week. I used to go buy them, just to find out what the Sex Pistols were doing this week when I was 13, 14 years old. I mean, they were my fucking heroes, So I guess punk being, kind of more of an immediate thing, the immediacy was lost in the American media landscape, I suppose.
Yeah, just because it took so long for everybody to find out about what was happening.
The bands would break up before anybody ever got to see them, know. So then, as a result of the fits and starts that punk happened in, it was really a situation where punk and new wave split apart, whereas originally you'd say, well, that's punk, that's new wave, but that definition became very hard, and where the new wave bands no longer played with the punk bands. And then there was the American hardcore movement, and that was where kind of more of the groundswell of American post-punk kind of started happening, where people said, well, that's great, you guys are doing that, but you know what, you're chasing off all the girls with the violent slam dancing, and, we want to do something that, is thoughtful and rebellious. And so American post-punk is essentially what became known as grunge.
Oh, interesting.
In my opinion. So I guess Michael Corcoran, who is kind of noted Austin music writer, he pointed to Woodshock as being where he saw the beginning of grunge.
Oh, cool.
So.
Well, you're in a little place in music history. What do you think about that?
That and $7.50 will get me a cup of coffee.
It's probably up to $8 since we've been talking.
Yeah. Inflation. Come on.
Okay, so I want to go back to SausTex just because I think it's so fascinating. You said you have 4 artist albums coming out over the next few months. Is that right? Mm-hmm. How many albums does SausTex put out generally in, like, say, a 12-month span? I know every month's going to be different, but...
Normally 4 to 6 releases a year, something like that. And
is it because it's such an undertaking to do one that you can only do 6 or whatever? Or is it because of finances and talent?
There's an unlimited amount of talent.
Not talent you like, and you won't work with people you don't like their music. So.
Well, that's true. I could certainly find plenty of stuff to put out, but it takes time away from me doing my own art. And, financially, stuff takes time to break even if it does at all. And it takes time to collect that money, even when it does break even, and...
Okay, so let's talk about that. So who would you be collecting the money from?
Distributors, individual record stores,
Is that your biggest seller, is individual, like independent record stores?
That's switched over time. Probably most of what I sell is off of Bandcamp.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
That is my biggest point of sale by far.
So I know that you had mentioned earlier that you're like, as far as like Spotify, they don't care at all about your little label. But does something...
Well, they really don't care about rock and roll.
Well, that's true. But does somebody like Bandcamp, do they give a little more of a shit? Or is it all just suits and they don't care?
Well, it's all suits, but, the point I would make about Bandcamp is that when I was talking previously about, the revenue that you get from Spotify, is that when Spotify went public, or when they made their equity offering, or more accurately, I guess I should say.
Their IPO?
Well, prior to their IPO.
Okay. And they went to get they went to get backers? Okay.
Who bought in the major record labels.
Oh.
But when it became apparent that Spotify was really going to become, one of the dominant forces, and like I said, place an effective value of 0 on catalogs like mine, at that point in time, I was getting some dependable digital money from Apple, which iTunes was the biggest, online music vendor in the world for a good 10 years, 12 years. Probably 90% of all music sales in the United States was off of iTunes. Amazon making up maybe 5%. So the point of all this is, though, that almost immediately Apple caved and went to a subscription model.
iTunes.
And so I can no longer sell my individual download. I can, but I can't post a direct link to it that doesn't go through Apple Music that says to the listener, hey, dumb fuck, why do you want to pay $1 for the Hickoids song? Or why do you want to pay $2 for Ed Hamill's song? Because for only $10 a month, you can have
all the songs.
So immediately within 2 months of Apple Music, the streaming platform coming along, that digital revenue dropped to about 1/3 of what it was.
Oh, wow.
And like I said, to people who aren't mainstream artists, that money makes a difference.
Right.
Whereas other people get the endorsement deals and this and that, and the concert deals. That's kind of proof of concept and, just a numbers game at that point. But a lot of people I know, more middling artists, that $800 or $1,000 a month they might be pulling in, that is part of their living. Whereas
$800, $1,000 a month is life-changing in a lot of people's lives.
Yeah.
Still.
Right.
I know we were joking about $7.50 for a cup of coffee, but $1,000, that's a lot of money.
It is. Unfortunately, the amounts of money that we all talk about now, are so astounding, that it has taken on the blush of being inconsequential.
That reminds me of, there's a scene in, I think it's the first Austin Powers, where he is basically holding the United States government hostage, and he says he wants $1 billion, and they all start laughing. And he's like, what's funny? And they said, this is 1963. There isn't $1 billion. It's like, that doesn't even exist.
Right.
And now we throw around the word billion when we're talking about people's money like it's nothing.
Yeah.
The Hickoids, when is the last time you guys released music?
Last Friday.
Yeah?
Yeah, got some more coming out tomorrow.
What did you release last Friday?
We released You're Gonna Miss Me. It's a single on Cacophony Clan Records by our mutual friend Peter Illing. Now, I just actually met Peter about 2 months ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How did y'all meet?
He reached out to me and I said, hey, I got this little label. I'm out of Marble Falls. And I was like, that's some pretty backwater location for a record label. Anyway, I met up with him and we sat down and he had a beer and I had a coffee. And we talked about it and he explained what he's doing with his charity singles initiative. He said, I'll pay for the record and you guys pick a charity and we'll donate money to it. I said, that sounds cool. We need to put something new out.
What charity did you pick?
High Voltage music.
High Voltage.
Yeah. Which, in the spirit of transparency, I'm on the board of. But I think, what they do is important.
Well, it is my understanding that has sold out.
It has.
And so,
but don't let that stop you from paying for a download on Bandcamp.
How can they find it?
Hickoids.bandcamp.com.
Okay. And the name of that song is?
You're Gonna Miss Me. And then the other half of that single drops tomorrow, which is The Bitch Is Back. Of course, the old Elton John kind of disco era.
Is it that song? Y'all covered that song?
Yeah.
How sick is it?
Depends on who's listening to it. Elton John probably thinks it's plenty fucking sick. But, I have a lot of admiration for Elton John. I mean, his early 70s records are fucking brilliant. I mean, he kind of turned into a cheeseball, Ironically, as somebody who's sober, I have a lot more respect for his music before he got sober. Mentioning Eagles. Somebody was in here buying an Eagles record and told them essentially the same thing about the main reason I don't like the Eagles. I said, listen to this song. So I went and grabbed a CD out of the bins out there and I put it on. Tiny Dancer by Elton John and Bernie Taupin, of course.
Yeah.
There is more emotional power and it's a better country rock song than the totality of the Eagles catalog.
Did they buy the Eagles album?
They did.
Did they also buy Tiny Dancer?
They did not, but I made them listen to my opinion. God damn it! So.
Is that part of the fun of owning a record store?
Yeah, well, it's nice to be able to turn people on to stuff. We talked about gatekeeping, and when I was a kid, the clerk at the record store, that was a guy who you trusted to point out the good stuff to you, to point you in the right direction. When really the digital things first started coming around, I mentioned more than one time in the newsletter, I said, you won't ever pick up a girl on iTunes. But,
do you have a newsletter?
Yeah.
How do people get the newsletter? What is the newsletter? What's in it?
Mixture of art and commerce.
How do people get involved with this newsletter? How do people get it?
Well, I would suggest that they look at the SausTex Facebook page.
SausTex.
That's correct. And there'll be a new one coming out tomorrow. I've been kind of remiss, but I've been a little bit busy doing construction and being a rock and roll janitor and whatnot, so.
I don't want to ask about the two new songs, the one that came out last week and the one that's coming out tomorrow, but is there a
But since you asked,
is there a Hickoids song that I can play so that people can get an idea of what the Hickoids are about?
Sure, we have a fairly recent single called Almost Nearly Nancy.
Almost Nearly Nancy?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Do you want to introduce it like you're a radio DJ?
Sure. Hey, this is Jeff Smith coming at you from the studios of the Corn Pound. Got a really hot new tune for you here. It's called Almost Nearly Nancy. Get 'em, Hickoids.
I love that. That was a little bit Johnny Fever and a little bit NPR.
Yeah.
Good job.
Ladies
again, I guess the physical vinyl is sold out, but people can go to Bandcamp and buy it. Was the whole charity thing Peter's idea? Peter from Cacophony Records? Was that the whole thing? That's why you're involved in it? Is that?
Yeah.
Do you have any plans to do other similar projects? It seems weird that two record companies are working together on one record.
Well, it's like the Jerry Seinfeld thing where him and Jerry's dating this high maintenance girl, and George and Jerry are having lunch together, and they're like, neither one of us on our own can satisfy a real woman's needs, but the two of us together. So George is kind of playing secretary. Go pick up the flowers. Go do this. Go do that. And,
gotcha. That makes sense.
So, yeah, that's a lighthearted way of expressing that. But, well, I was going to show you something here. So this is actually a record I put out last year, Call Me Animal, a tribute to the MC5, Wayne Kramer, of course, from the MC5. Passed away earlier this year. That's a band out of Memphis called Josephus and the George Jonestown Massacre that I work with. That is the fourth charity-oriented record I've done with them.
With this band?
Yeah. So different guest stars on every record. And as you can see, that's a double album with a pretty stunning array of guest performers on there.
Alice Cooper?
Yeah, Alice Cooper, Cherie Curry from The Runaways, Kim Thale.
Mike Watt?
Soundgarden.
Wow.
Yeah.
Check you out and things. Look at that, featuring Jeff Smith. Is that the Jeff Smith I'm looking at?
That is the Jeff Smith.
Well, check you out, man.
Yeah, I'm on there with Richie from the Plasmatics.
Very cool. Well, Jeff Smith, from all of the things, where can people find out more on social media about you, the Hickoids, and SausTex?
I am the Jeff Smith on Facebook. The with two E's.
Oh, okay, great.
At Hickoids and SausTex are Instagram and Facebook handles. Flagship Records, same thing.
Okay.
I'm not hard to find. I make it a little bit hard just to weed out the riffraff.
Sure.
And I do have a website, SausTex.com, that is in a horrible state of disrepair.
What would somebody find at the website?
They'd find a lot of outdated information.
Be sure to go check out all what happened a long time ago at SausTex.com.
It's just not current, and I could explain the long, sad story behind it. I haven't lost the domain or anything. It's just, as you can see, there's a lot of plates spinning around here.
Got a lot going on.
It's an HTML-based website. Editing it is like one of my least favorite things in the world, as I mentioned. That's somebody who could barely send an email 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of catching up to do.
Sure. Before we wrap up, is there anything we didn't talk about or I didn't ask you about specifically that you wanted to talk about today?
No, we covered a good variety of subjects. I appreciate the thoughtfulness of your questions, and I'm going to keep on keeping on. I hope you do too.
I absolutely will. And as my friend Kinky Friedman used to say, I'll see you down the highway.
Yeah. I never met Kinky, but I had a lot of admiration for him.
I interviewed him.
Yeah, Peter told me that.
I was at his ranch. He smoked probably 2 cigars while we were doing the interview. We went through probably between half and 3/4 of a bottle of booze. We chatted for nearly 4 hours.
Wow.
It was fucking phenomenal.
Yeah.
That guy was so rad. So it ended up being a 2-parter. And he let me play music, obviously. He let me play a song, all of the songs he wrote. But there was this one song, I was like, oh, can I play that song? It was called Ride 'em Jew Boy. I said, can I play that song? He goes, you can, but I'd rather you play the Willie Nelson version of that song. And I was like, fucking all right.
Yeah.
He played, he picked up his guitar and he said, oh, I wrote this song yesterday. And he played it, and I don't think he ever got to record it. He didn't release it before he died.
How long was it, 2 years before he died or less?
So he died, in June? This would have been maybe a year ago.
Yeah.
Year and a half, maybe, something like that. That dude was rad as hell. Couldn't believe that I got to go hang out with him. That was pretty cool.
Lived a pretty amazing life, to go from a kind of gonzo rock and roll / country performer, coming up with something as off the wall as, my hook is going to be on the Jewish cowboy, and writing detective novels. And
he wrote 30 of them. Maybe it was 25 4, but that's a lot. He got disillusioned with the music business, so he said, fuck off. And then he just, that creative outlet has to be something. So that's when he wrote all those books, was after he had told the music business to fuck off. It's wild.
And then his run for governor, which didn't really...
His motto was, why not?
Yeah. Finally an honest man,
Opening music is the song FSP Theme, written, performed, and provided by Ambush Vin. Closing music is from the song Say My Name off the 2021 album Underdog Anthems, used with permission from Jax Hollow. If you like the show, tell a friend. Subscribe and rate and review the show on iTunes and wherever else you download podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. All the episodes are available there as well. Check me out on Vero at Fascination Street Pod and TikTok at Fascination Street Pod. And again, thanks for listening.